Okay, so now we are live on Facebook, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this plenary talk. This is our second plenary talk for the second day of the conference. Thank you for joining us. I'd like also to remind you that we are live streaming this session on Facebook and that you can interact with the presenter and other attendees using the chat box. If you have any questions to the presenter, please type them in the Q&A box, and I will be able to ask them at the end of the presentation. Without further delay, let me welcome Dr. Harry Kuchah. Dr. Kuchah is the lecturer in language education at the University of Leeds, UK. He is the current president of the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, NileTESOL. We are honored and glad to virtually welcome you to Egypt, Dr. Harry, and to our conference. And I'm going to stop here because people would like to listen from you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Amira. It's always a pleasure for me to be able to share with colleagues back in motherland. If you permit, I'll just get my slides on. Just a second, it says, okay. Can you see my slides now, please? Can you just confirm that you can see? All right, okay. Right, so thank you for inviting me. And I wanted this morning because it's morning still morning in the UK, to share some reflections from my work and research with young learners and teenagers over the last couple of years. And I decided this time to frame it around the focus of collaborative teacher inquiry. And by this, I'm actually looking at teacher inquiry that's happening within the classroom, within the framework of a teacher association, and which is happening in partnership with learners. And I'll be sharing my roadmap to arriving at these ideas, and also sharing some excerpts of work that has been done by myself, but also by my colleagues in Cameroon. So very quickly, I just wanted to start with a background of my kind of experience. A lot of my early career, the first 15 years of my work have been basically training teachers, teachers of young learners, but working with these young learners themselves to be able to understand exactly what it is that makes them interested in, engaged in, and agentive in language learning, especially in English language learning. So that information from these gentlemen here and the ladies has often helped me to revisit the theories and the ideas about teacher education, and informed the way I go about working with teachers in different contexts around the world. And in working with teachers, I've found that there's always a lot of emphasis on things like what teaching methods or techniques are the best to use in classrooms. In fact, I've been in a training session that was in Germany, spent 8 hours working with teachers and showing them all sorts of interactive ideas. And at the end of the day, a teacher comes to me and says, Harry, can you just give me ideas and points that I can take to my classroom tomorrow? And unfortunately, I don't work in that context, and it's not possible for someone in another context to prescribe a solution, an immediate magic solution to the issues that a teacher would find in their classroom. It's even difficult for the same teacher to transfer practices from one class to the next classroom in the same school. And it's more difficult then when we have to transfer ideas from elsewhere into contexts where the research that informs those ideas has not been conducted. So teachers are always focused on these grand ideas that have come to us from the textbooks about interactive language education, what the curriculum should be, what the classroom conditions should be. Sometimes those classroom conditions don't often reflect the realities of teachers in Africa, or at least in the context in which I have I have worked. But very hardly do we pay a lot of attention to the learner. Now, courses in child and adolescent psychology talk about all these aspects about language learners and language learning. We know about the different theories, but these theories, of course, do have limitations in different contexts. So, for example, we know now from literature that in the sociocultural theory, as interesting as it is, the ideas about classroom interaction or about democratic processes in the classroom work very well for children from homes where there are democratic principles. So in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, a child who comes from a home where parents allow them to do things, to ask questions, to make suggestions, to question decisions, would do very well in a classroom, whereas children who come from a very rural setting with strong traditional hierarchies, where children don't speak when an adult speaks, when children can't question an adult, would have a hard time coping in a classroom that's very democratic. So these ideas all often need to be tested within the context, and teachers often make decisions at the spur of the moment, decisions that are never fully captured in the literature on appropriate teaching practices within Africa. So what about the learner? We know, for example, that our learners come to the classroom with their emotions, their aspirations, their interests, lots of things. They are resources themselves, and they come with huge linguistic resources in the case of Africa, where we've got the multilingual context of Africa. But they also come, above everything else, with some amount of involvement, some amount of engagement, some amount of agency in other things, which we can then build upon to develop learning in our classrooms. And this is very important because, like, we can teach till thy kingdom come. If learning doesn't take place, students wouldn't get a thing. But when they are engaged, when they are involved, learning takes place. So sometimes good learning leads to good learning. Good teaching doesn't always lead to good learning. And that is why the best teachers still have students who fail. And sometimes the worst teachers have students who emerge like stars, because there's something happening in the classroom beyond the teacher. And that fits well with ideas made by Jeremy Hammer, who looks at, and other experts in the field who look at teaching as actually facilitation, where the teacher adapts different roles just to help scaffold learning, just to help students to be able to develop their own learning. So in reality, when we say we teach, we don't really teach, or at least we shouldn't be teaching, because too much teaching sometimes impedes learning. What teachers actually do is developing learning rather than providing information for students. Of course, we are also resources to students, and so it's always possible that we might provide information that supports students to move to the next level in their learning process. So my ideas about this partnership start as far back as 2011, 12, 13, when I was investigating good practice in two distinct contexts in Cameroon. And my research basically looked at how teachers taught in the classroom, in a young learner classroom. And then I had a conversation with children about what they thought about the way their teachers taught them. And then when I'd done that, I collect the data I collected from the children and from the classrooms and from talking to the classroom teacher, then helped me generate information that I used in a 2-day workshop with a group of 30 teachers in 2 parts of the country. So we were basically, over 2 days, we were watching some videos that the teachers had selected. So I recorded videos of these teachers teaching in their classrooms. I had simulated recall interviews, just playing the video and talking through every bit of the lesson to identify patterns of practice and the decisions behind their practices. Then when I'd spoken with the children, I matched what the children said to what the classroom teachers said. and then used that as input to generate discussions and reflection with another group of teachers in a workshop. So I just want to share an example of some of the things that emerged from the workshop that I had with teachers about teachers' assumptions of young learners. And this is around group work. So in this context, the classrooms were very large. The classes were between 70 children, 70 11-year-old children, and 124 11-year-old children in the same classroom. So they were large by a mile. Now, we watched a lesson. There was a video in which one of the teachers, the teacher with the largest classroom, used group work to some success in generating information around a topic. I think the topic was about what children like and what they dislike in relation to something. I can't remember immediately. But when we watched that video, I wanted the teachers in my group to reflect on that video, and I wanted them just to identify what they thought was good about the lesson. And none of them identified group work initially as something good. They all thought that was chaotic. That was something they wouldn't do in their classroom. So this teacher, for example, says, at times when we give the opportunity to children, it creates a wild atmosphere. That is, children become noisy. But it also depends on the lesson. If you give the children the opportunity to just ask questions here and there, it brings noise. Now, the ideas about group work were generally negative because teachers were looking at the sizes of their classroom. They didn't trust the children to be able to focus on their work. They didn't think that that would help them achieve their goals. So they preferred more direct ways of teaching the children so that they could transmit the information and in as quick a manner as possible. But then I confronted them with ideas from the children. So I showed them some of the data that I had collected from children in the classrooms that I had observed. And these are some of the things that the children were saying. So in this case, for example, we are talking about, we are just reflecting on a lesson we've just followed with the children in their classroom. And they're saying, well, if the teacher asked us to go and find out, it will make me to make an effort to learn. So these children want to be able to do things independently. They want to be able to go and find out. They don't want the teacher just telling them things. They want the teacher to give them an opportunity to go find out and come and share their ideas. Here, for example, these kids are explaining to me what their teacher usually does. So any question that is difficult for us, she would ask us to work in groups to find the answer. How do you form your groups? I asked. We work with our bench mates. Now, because these are crowded classes, there are usually 3 to 4 children sitting sharing the same bench. So we work in our bench. So I asked, I see. So you discuss with your friends, with your bench mates before you give an answer. And Ashu says yes, because when you are 2 or 3, you think more better, these are kids, than when you are alone. So there are indications from the children that they can do well if they discuss with each other. And the data, it's a huge amount of data, shows lots of cases where the children actually wanted to be given opportunity to interact with each other and to generate their own knowledge and share with the teacher. So when I confronted the teacher with these ideas and asked them to reflect again on their initial assumptions, at the end of 2 days, the perspectives of the teachers began shifting because they were listening to children's voices, but also watching videos of their colleagues teaching in classrooms that looked very much like their own classrooms. So for example, here, one of the teachers says, from what Harry reports of what the children said concerning group work, I really agree with them. That is with the children. I think it is wrong for us to presume that the children are not able to work in groups. We have seen a good example of how well they can develop very good ideas and even good English when they work together. That class is even bigger than most of our classes. So I don't think we have any excuse for not doing group work. So you can see their perspectives are shifting now because they are seeing what other colleagues are doing, they're listening to the students. And other examples of things that the teachers said were like, we've watched those colleagues, it's just made me aware of some of the key aspects that I don't implement in my class. For example, group work. So all of this came, and this is just an example of the many initial assumptions of how many of the teachers' initial assumptions about what works and what they can do and what they can't do in their classroom started shifting once they had the opportunity to observe their colleagues teach in real life classrooms and to reflect on their colleagues' practices in relation to the perspectives from the children, which I shared with them. So this initial research that I conducted kind of shaped the way I look at teacher education. A shift in my own perspective of teacher education from being a one-off training process where we share ideas about innovation or innovative practices with teachers and ask them to go to their classroom and implement them. Of course, this has happened for very long, and it's often shown us its limitations because teachers would tend to resist ideas that are not consistent with what's happening within their own classrooms, especially when these ideas are brought to them by people who are disconnected from the reality of their classrooms. So this kind of pushed me towards thinking about what ways we could get teachers to be involved in constant reflection. And I'm avoiding the word research, not on purpose. Well, I'm avoiding the word research because sometimes it does come with very academic connotations. But in reality, I'm talking here about research that teachers do in their classroom, basic questioning and answering and reflection. Okay. So the idea of collaborative inquiry started a few years ago in 2013 in Cameroon, when my supervisor at that time, Richard Smith, and I went to the CAMELTA, the Cameroon ELT conference, and we thought that it might be best for Richard to shape his session more as a hands-on plenary session where teachers were reflecting or had an opportunity to reflect on the issues, the key issues that they faced in their classrooms as a basis for developing a research agenda for the association itself. So we started by asking teachers to write down research questions if they had the opportunity to do research in their classrooms. What would be the key research questions that they would be addressing. And we collected research questions from 188 teachers at the conference. These research questions were later screened and categorized by the vice president, the vice president and his committee, the vice president in charge of research and projects of CAMELTA, and working with me at that time, and my colleague, Dr. Gladys Focho. And then when we had looked at the different questions, we decided to send to teachers an open-ended questionnaire, and the open-ended questionnaire just required them to tell a recent successful story of a teaching experience. So tell us a story about a lesson that you taught and that was very successful, and say a bit, reflect a bit on why you think it was successful. We also wanted them to write one or two key problems that they faced and how they have attempted to deal with those problems in their classrooms. And the idea behind this open-ended questionnaire was to collect a huge amount of data from the teachers, which we could then use to generate patterns of issues, but also patterns of best practice within the context. The last part of the questionnaire just wanted them to comment on the experience of filling that questionnaire, of writing about their experiences. And we've already published that. We published this information in 2016 with Richard Smith. At the moment, if you get on the CAMELTA website, you would find the data that we collected from teachers, their stories of success, but some of the issues that they were describing and how they were trying to deal with those. Now, the idea was for us to also to encourage other teachers to get into that into this bank of ideas and generate their own ideas about good practice, but also to encourage future researchers, especially those in the university colleges of education, to be able to find research questions that were relevant to the needs of teachers in the context, rather than just academic research questions that they imagined. So the data we collected here and from this questionnaire and the whole process led us to thinking about what we've now come to call teacher association research, which by analogy with teacher research is defined as a systematic inquiry, which is derived from members' express priorities. So the members of a teacher association express their priorities, and these priorities are officially endorsed by the teacher association itself. And they then engage as active participants in collecting and processing data, because this is something that's a collective process for them to improve understanding and practice in their specific context. So just to step back a moment, some of the research questions that we collected, these are at least 6 of the hundreds of research questions that we collected from these 188 teachers. So this is exactly how we categorized them. So we went through some of the research questions were outward looking, so looking more at the association and the management of the association. But those that were more specifically related to language education and the classroom were then categorized. And these are just 3 of the 11 categories that we found. So teachers were talking about, they had issues with student participation. They had issues with dealing with low resources. They had issues with teaching in large or multi-grade classes, issues of motivation, etc. So having categorized this and uploaded them, we hoped that teachers or student teachers would visit this bank of research questions and engage in research, and some have already done. What we did much later, when we had collected the data from the questionnaire, was basically write up a report and also share with teachers some of the key findings. So for example, in 2015, there was a paper published in the ITFA Research SIG newsletter, in which we analyzed a number of colleagues from Cameroon, notably Dr. Fortu, myself, and research SIG colleagues, analyzed some of the data to see what themes were emerging and what best practice was available in the context. We've also had conference presentations. In 2015, I did a plenary session in Cameroon. 2016, Dr. Eric Ekembe, whom I will talk about in a moment, and myself did another plenary from the data. So we're sharing some of that information. And at NileTESOL in 2019, Dr. Ekembe again had a presentation which drew from some of this data. So these are some of the things. We've also had at least two student teachers at the higher, the University College of Education in Yaoundé do their dissertations based on the research questions. But the most important thing for me has been the birth of the Camelta Research Group. Now, the Camelta Research Group started in 2016, thanks to funding from the University of Bath, where I worked at that time, but also support from the American embassy in Cameroon. And Dr. Ekembe and myself wanted to get teachers who were interested in collaborative research, working together with their students, but also with their colleagues, to generate ideas of best practice that were relevant to their students and to their context. And so we had a group of teachers, for most of them in the first 5 years, but also some more experienced colleagues coming together to try and encourage them to reflect and interrogate their practices, to engage in collaborative research, classroom research, as part of their own professional development. And these teachers have been working since 2006. The Camelta Research Group is still very live and active, probably the only resilient strand of the association at a time when the country was in crisis. And the activities within the group include things like discussions on WhatsApp, but face-to-face meetings. And some of these have been around discussing articles. So they've identified articles in relation to specific topics, and then they generate discussions over a weekend. They've been sharing motivational practices because they selected the theme of motivation. That was one of the key themes that they selected, and the research questions from the bank of research questions online. They've been involved in lesson planning and teaching, reporting and reflecting on their own success stories from the classroom. They've also had some training in relation to action research and exploratory practice. Now, this was not a top-down kind of process. These were ideas that were emerging as the teachers engaged with each other, and they themselves requested training and action research and exploratory practices. But one of the things that they have done, which really strikes a chord with me and my idea of partnership, has been what they called a mobility scheme, which basically involves two teachers working together, observing each other's classroom, talking to each other's students, to get more ideas about how they could improve their practice. And then going back to reflect on that together, and together with their students, generate ideas for what the content of language lessons could be, and what the processes of language lessons would be. So this is an example from the classrooms of these teachers, okay? A traditional classroom in Cameroon would be like this. So because students don't have textbooks, sometimes teachers, and this would be in rural schools, but also even in the cosmopolitan cities, teachers sometimes have to write down long text on the board with comprehension questions. But through this involvement with students, these teachers have been able to identify those themes and topics that are of interest to students, that can help students to engage in learning, to go out and find out for themselves, and to show a sense of agency in their own learning, just the type of things that the kids were telling us in the earlier slides. And teachers' practices have now shifted from these very traditional teacher-fronted ways of doing things into more collaborative engagement with their students. So for example, these teachers talking to their students found that students were interested in issues around their context. So this is a class, for example, where some of the content of the textbook is very alien from the students' experience. Now, a long time ago when I used to teach in secondary school, there was a textbook that was looking, with one of the units looking at war in Iraq. And the terminology was very, very distant from the realities of my students. And they found difficulties engaging with things like that. Of course, the situation will be different now because Cameroon is in its own war, and children have seen, young learners and teenagers have seen things that they would not have seen in my time. And so it was not possible at that time to engage with text like that. Now, students in the classes of these teachers are getting a bigger say in what they want to be talking about. And because the teachers are giving the students that freedom, they're beginning to engage a bit more. So in this example, the students want to talk about the environment, okay, because their city is not very clean. They are aware of the effects of environmental degradation and things like that, and they really want to talk about those. So here they have decided with the teachers that they would like to write a letter to the mayor of the city council to advise him on what they should do to take care of the environment. And these teachers have then gone ahead to teach them about letter writing, how to write a formal letter. Now the students are more engaged because they want to use that knowledge to achieve a specific task that they have set for themselves. And so they're working collaboratively. And these are examples of the letters that they have written, and suggested lots of different things, amongst which recycling. And to show the mayor an example of what they mean by the brilliant ideas that they are sharing with the mayor, they have decided that they would show some examples they've now produced from materials around them. They have recycled some of the waste around them, and these are examples that they're showing in their classrooms. So we also have students talking about being more eco-responsive and things like that. So lots of different activities around a theme that they have selected because it's of interest to them. Now, this is a very recent example from another teacher's class, my colleague Antoinette, who works in Ebolova, which is in the south of Cameroon. And she very kindly gave me permission to share this example of our students using local objects around them to produce something different. So I'll just warn that the sound quality is very low, and that it was recorded in a real life classroom, so it's a bit noisy. If you could just be patient and quiet. If you have kids around, could you get on your knees and ask them to just spare you 1 minute so you can listen to the video? I'll play it and keep quiet.
I made a hanging flower with the cardboard, yellow, pink, white, and black color. For the cones, I made it in a circle, and I made it in a circle and I roll it. For the roses, I make it in a spiral form and I bend it. For the leaves, I painted it with the black paints. For the flower, I use white cardboard to make it in a circle form. Then for the base, I use a cartoon.
All right, that's good.
I put water inside, then that's a hole. The hole, the tube of the ink inside. When I open like this, the pressure that is inside push the water. The water will come inside from my tube, and then I let my hand and close again. Then and this one is a
Other things you'd see from that video, they have recycled paper and other things from their environment, but they're also talking about this. So teachers are using these kinds of activities to engage in writing, not just writing, but also speaking activities. The students are using their knowledge of the different colors and shapes and explaining processes. So rather than teaching them the grammar of explaining processes, they're actually engaging in that and giving the teacher an opportunity to identify the language needs, immediate language needs of the students as they engage in their task. Others, and this I got from Abigail, another colleague in Cameroon, whose students decided that they wanted to talk about cultures. Cameroon is an immensely multicultural country with more than 250 local languages and tribes. And some Cameroonians don't know a lot about their different cultures. So in this class, the students have engaged in finding out about a culture other than their own culture and finding photographs and writing about specific aspects of the different cultures that they are particularly interested in. So this, for example, Bida Zambo is a child from the south of Cameroon, south or center of Cameroon, a Beti from the Beti tribe, who's learning about the Bamileke culture in the west of Cameroon. So they're investing in knowing about their country and knowing about the different cultures of their own, of their country. And this they do through engaging with other students from those cultures, but also finding out from parents, from the community, from online sources, from newspapers, etc., etc. They're also sharing folk tales like this one that I wanted to end with. So I'll share the story with you. And this is about a mosquito and her earrings. So this is a text that I collected myself working with students and generating the story, but also giving the story back to them so they could do the artwork themselves. So children are engaged in developing their own book of folk tales. So this is one of them, the mosquito and her earrings. So once upon a time, there lived a mosquito in a pan in a village far away. The mosquito had very nice earrings. The village girls admired its earrings. They wanted to have them. One day there was a party in the village. The boys and girls of the village went to the party. They drank and danced and they were happy. The mosquito also went to the party. It drank and danced and was happy. While the mosquito was dancing, the girl stole its earrings. The mosquito felt very sad and angry. Today, the mosquito flies and buzzes in everybody's ears looking for her earrings. Now, before you disbelieve this story, remember that it's only in textbooks that elephants can fly and that all sorts of things happen. So this is a folk tale. The students are telling their own story because they want to tell stories from their different tribes, and I have lots of stories like this, which I typed out, and then the children were able, and these are very young children though, these are very young, 11-year-olds writing their own stories and drawing pictures to illustrate their stories, typical of what you'd find in the big books that are often not very contextually relevant to the children, that are about stories of children elsewhere in the world with different realities. So they were themselves writing their own stories. So when you engage with them, listen to what they want to do, give them the challenge to do that, the opportunity to do that, supporting them with the language they need. These are some of the creative things that students can do. So for me, this partnership in inquiring about teaching and learning partnership is beneficial both to learners and to teachers. For learners, it brings authenticity to their learning experience. They are talking and writing about the things that are authentic to them, their own authentic experiences. Now, one of the things with the literature on authenticity is it's often very text-based. So we are told, for example, that an authentic text is a text that is not written with the purpose of teaching English language. Okay, but that's just a text-based definition of authenticity. Authentic to who? So the human-based conceptualization of authenticity relates to whose experiences are we really talking about? How is what is in the story authentic to the realities of the learners? So when you give them that opportunity to engage in thinking about what works and what doesn't work in the classroom, what you should do and what you might modify in the classroom, you give them an opportunity to be authentic, to bring an authentic learning experience to the classroom. It gives them the opportunity to collaborate, to engage with each other. We saw pictures of them working in groups, sharing ideas together. And as they share ideas together, they negotiate meaning. Okay, there are these information gaps that they might have because of the lack of the right vocabulary or the expressions, and they negotiate meaning. Then the teacher can support them. They are motivated and engaged in the learning, and it takes into account their agency. Students don't come to the classroom as empty vessels. They come with some amount of agency. Unfortunately, it is formal education that deprives students of their agency. And when they go to university, we complain that they are not participating in their classroom because they have gone through a learning culture that doesn't permit them to engage. So the earlier we start engaging our learners, the better for us and the better for them, because it becomes part of their learning culture for when they get to higher education. And then of course, it also benefits us teachers because it helps us, it enhances our knowledge and understanding of our own learners. It gives us the opportunity to identify their needs, but also their ability and their talents, and to use this in creative ways that enhance their learning. But for the teacher, it improves self-confidence. For example, many of the teachers of the Camelta research group, some of the teachers in the Camelta research group have now gone ahead to write for publication. Some of them have been able to do presentations within the teacher group, but also at NileTESOL conferences or other events. And some of them are writing. I cited the article written by Dr. Kembe, an established researcher, but also with Fonjong, who was a teacher and a member of the group. But the research group is also now supporting teachers at the University College of Education. They are now recognized within that institution, and they do run joint events. And thanks to that, young pre-service teachers have been motivated to join the research group. And once they have graduated, they have been able to be very confident to also run presentations. Now, this is a quote that I'm taking from one of the teachers I spoke to in the research group. And this is what she told me. I used to just follow the advice and instructions of inspectors and more experienced colleagues. That was in the past. I know why I do what I do in my class now. So this kind of mutation of identity from the teacher, the novice teacher who just followed instructions and advice and just tried in the class. If they failed, they blamed themselves for not following the advice very well. Now they know what they do in their classroom. So in a sense, this process of collaborative inquiry, working with another colleague and also with students, has made these teachers more aware and confident about what they do, and they can articulate the rationale between their actions in a more structured manner. This would be my last slide. And this is a quote that I have been longing to use in a presentation. And this is the first time I'm using it. It comes from Misty Adenoy. And she said this during the TESOL summit on the future of the English language profession in Greece, in Athens, in 2017. Professional teacher associations have an important role to play in curating and disseminating new knowledge. If our teacher associations in Africa do not engage in systematic ways of investigating their classroom, we would continue to be fed with theories and ideas of best practice that come from contexts that are very distant from the realities of our context. This is a global village, as we are told. In this global village, we need to be, if not the chiefs or the lamidos or the kings and queens, we need to be royalty in the ELT profession within our context. And that comes from collaborative work, which is systematic and which leads to generation of practice, which we can share within our context and test, experiment, and disseminate to our own professionals. That would be my last word. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hari, for sharing these inspiring examples of student-teacher collaboration and partnerships. We have some questions in the Q&A box, but before I read the questions, I have one question that is mine, actually. So you have shared these successful examples of student-teacher collaborations, promoting this student-centered approach to teaching. In larger classes, and this is also the case in many of our Egyptian schools, there are some challenges in applying such approach. From your experience working with teachers who are teaching larger classes, what challenges have you faced and what advice would you give to teachers who are working in similar contexts?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, when I trained as a teacher, I had one of the most I enjoyed my training. I had one of my lecturers who was excellent in engaging us in interactive activities. We were about 30 in a classroom. Sometimes he would come with a tape recorder, with worksheets, he would play music, we would listen to that, and it was so interesting. And then I graduated and became a teacher. Or rather, I practiced my teaching in a classroom that was made up of about 40 students. And then when I graduated, I was sent to work in a part of the country, and there were 232 students in one of my classrooms. In fact, I taught across 4 levels, and my smallest classroom was made up of 147 12-year-olds. So my life has been very much embedded in teaching in large classes. And my learning experience in my village in Agen, when I went to primary school, we were about 60 in the classroom. So that's my ecology. Now the problem, and I am guilty of this as well, is that over the years, our contexts have been conceptualized as difficult contexts. And once you conceptualize context as difficult circumstances, you condition people to see themselves as victims of a reality which is like their reality. So what I have come to say is large classes are like a health condition, okay? A permanent health condition. You don't go and hang yourself because you've got a permanent health condition. No, you manage your health condition. You change your way of living. You change your life choices, okay? That's what you do. So large classes will be there in our context for as long as we are alive, at least this generation. So forget about them being, they are not difficult in the sense in which they have been characterized. They are our normal circumstances and we have to adapt to them. Now, the way I've worked my way through this, I have an article published in 2011, Kuchah and Smith 2011. It's freely available online if you type Kuchah and Smith 2011. It's now open access on the pedagogy of autonomy. And we focus on the pedagogy of rather than pedagogy for autonomy, because a lot of the wonderful ideas about learner autonomy out there, sometimes teachers translate them into classroom practice in ways that are not consistent with the needs and expectations of the learners. Learners don't become autonomous. They are supported to become autonomous. In my context, engaging with my learners, asking them questions about what they really wanted to achieve, how they wanted me to help them, where we would find the resources, how we would manage the little space that we had, 232 teenagers in a classroom, some of them standing outside by the windows. Asking them basic questions like that helped me to get responses that help us as a class generate ways in which we could manage learning. So in this class, for example, there were only 19 textbooks, so we could not rely on the textbooks. Some students were outside, so we could not rely on the space in the classroom. So we had to take the very strict decisions suggested by students, each of them going out there, finding a text in English, thinking about what we might benefit from that text and engaging with me. So I was offering some of them some form of teacher training and reflection. So my students were becoming my partners. They were becoming teachers like me, thinking of not just bringing content, but also thinking about how we might use that content in the classroom and generate ideas. Now, when we give students the opportunity, they can do well. Of course, it doesn't happen in one day. It happens gradually. But the first step is recognizing that we are not the masters of learning. Students are, and genuinely and humbly seeking for solutions to the classroom challenges from students. Some of us don't have humility as teachers, and that in itself is a barrier. Our students are not, we are.
Thank you for this. We have a question about the large classes again, and how to make group work successful in larger classes.
Well, I don't have a magic solution to that, to be honest. I can only talk about what I have done. If you're working in groups with students, you have to set the rules down. Now, when I say setting down the rules, I actually mean developing the rules with students. In my context, when we had agreed that the space in the classroom was small, in my experience, and that we're going to move out of the classroom for some of our sessions and work in groups of 10 under the trees in the north of Cameroon, we then proceeded to writing the rules and regulations for our classroom outside. So the students themselves wrote down all the rules and regulations, and together with their class leaders, we worked through the rules, eliminated some, included some. So my input was accepted because there I accepted their input. When you negotiate the rules, don't bend them yourself. So very often I've heard teachers tell students, don't bring a mobile phone in class to class. If your mobile phone rings, you're disturbing my class, you would be in trouble. And then the teacher's mobile phone rings and they pick a call and go outside. We can't have double standards because we are not just language teachers. We don't just teach language learners, we are teaching human beings. So group work begins by setting down the rules together with students so they themselves know that they are respecting rules that they have set for themselves and that the teacher is respecting the rules as well during the time you are spending with them.
That's true. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And I will pick up from what you said about the role of teacher associations in promoting this approach of teacher-student collaboration. Would you like to tell us more about this role and how teacher associations can promote this approach?
Yeah, well, one of the things at the moment I'm collecting the mission statements and constitutions of teacher associations from across Africa. I haven't approached NileTESOL yet, but I'll definitely be doing so. I want to look at what these teacher associations are saying about their mission and vision, what their aims and goals are, what they want to achieve, how their leadership structures are made up, constituted, and how the pedagogic structure or the CPD structures are constructed. Because one of the things is we very recently Africa's witnessed an emergence of many teacher associations. We have at least 20. I know of at least 28 teacher associations, English teacher associations across Africa, and the latest buzz has been within French-speaking West Africa, which is a great thing because these teachers are genuinely supporting each other. But how structured is that? And how collective is that? And how contextually focused is that? What is the big picture? Is it just about helping teachers to survive from a day-to-day basis in the classroom? Or is it about actually setting an agenda which would lead teachers to generate data and evidence of best practice that can then inform a policy in the country? So if a teacher association like NileTESOL had a research agenda which is endorsed by the association and there's local evidence of best practice which is shared across the country by all English teachers, then we stand in a better position to influence policy. As long as we are only having the one-off conference, the one-off workshop, the WhatsApp group chats about, oh, these are some resources that I used today, we would never be able to influence policy in our context. And so we would continue to be fed with ideas that are generated and donated to us from countries which are not, from contexts where the realities are very different from our context. So I think teacher associations can have a real good role in influencing policy within the context if they work in a more structured, systematic manner.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hari, for sharing your presentation and insights and experience with our audience. We are very glad to have you with us at the conference, and I'm sure your thoughts have inspired many of us. I hope you can read the chat box and see people's comments. I'm afraid we don't have time for any more questions because we have concurrent sessions after this one. So I'd like to give time for the audience to be able to leave and move between the rooms. But thank you again for joining us, and thank you for attending our conference and participating and sharing your expertise with our teachers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.